chat in the chat, it's going to be recorded. So, as usual, I encourage you guys to ask questions or interrupt or whatever, but just keep in mind that we are recording. And then I'm going to share my notes. Okay. So we're talking about user testing this week, and we're going to spend the next couple of weeks on this, as well as kind of like getting ready for the final. Throughout the semester, we've been discussing a lot of different concepts like positive and negative feedback, progression and emergence, goals, obstacles, and rewards, and all these other aspects of game design and mechanics. So now we want to test to see if those principles really work. And we want to also collect information about the user experience from our games. So all mediums have feedback and critique and review, but games are kind of unique in their artistic process in the sense that people have to play games. They don't just you can't just read a game or watch a game like a movie, or just look at a game like a piece of art. You have to be able to play it. And so when you play a game, it has to make sense and it has to work. The user has to be able to understand what buttons to press and what they should be doing. So when we critique a game or when we test a game, we're not just talking about conceptually how the game works. We're also talking about logistically and mechanically how the game works. And so we really need people to test our games more than any other medium. So we have to kind of put ourselves in the perspective of the user a lot to understand how the game feels and what it looks like to them. Because you could spend a lot of time making a game that looks really cool and has lots of really cool ideas, but if the player doesn't know what button to hit when they start, they're not going to be able to play the game. So when we're doing user testing, we want to look for feedback in terms of how the game works, but also in terms of how, if the art is good, if the sound is good, there's all these different things that are kind of wrapped up into it. So to do good user testing, we have to think about what kind of questions we want to ask the user and how to kind of hone in on what might be unique or most important to our game in order to get good feedback and then improve on the game or make the game more playable. So one of the things we have to think about is the difference between bugs versus playability. So a game that just doesn't work, that's when a game has bugs, and that's important, but it's not really what user testing is for. That's what quality assurance or debugging is for. You don't really want to user test something that has lots of bugs because you're not going to get good feedback. People are going to say this doesn't work. So typically we want to fix all our bugs before we move on to user testing, so that the player is just focusing on the experience and not necessarily saying I died and I don't know what happened or something like that. So we want to ideally have our games be bug free so the player can just play the game and just tell us about the experience of playing the game. That's not always possible. Obviously, most games ship with some bugs, some more than others. But we want to test our game ourselves to make sure it works before we send it out for user testing so we can get the best feedback from our users. So there's a bug and a gamepad. So another thing to look for with user testing is onboarding, or we called it guidance when we were talking about level design. This is really basic. Does the player understand basic controls and movement? Does the player understand the basic goals and game mechanics? So, is it obvious to the player that you have to jump over gaps in the platforms, or that you can jump on enemies to kill them? If those things aren't very clear to the player, they're not going to be able to enjoy the game. So that's one thing that you want to sort of ask the player about. Did you understand what you're supposed to do? Were the instructions clear? And then they can hopefully give you feedback that, yes, this worked really well, or no, I didn't really understand what I was supposed to be doing. I think with our games, most of the time, things will be pretty obvious because we're working in this very specific medium with a 2D platformer that has a lot of conventions that people are used to. But we do want to test not just with other gamers, but like with anybody who might be interested in playing, and they can give us feedback on whether it makes sense, even if you've never really played a video game before. Another thing we want to look at is the play time. How long does the player play for? And do they make it to the end of the game? Do they give up? Why do they give up? These are all questions that we can ask in our surveys. If the game is really hard, that might be intentional, right? Like you may want to create a game that's really hard because you want to get that specific audience of people who like really hard games. And so, a player might say this was too hard, I gave up. That doesn't necessarily mean that's bad. It might be, good to know that the game is too hard rather than too easy. But if every single person who plays the game says this is too hard, I gave up, then you might need to think about tweaking the difficulty a little bit. There's also just the motivation factor. Like if they didn't get to the end, but they said they were bored, or they just didn't care, or they didn't know what to do. That's another thing to look at as far as playtime. And so we wanted to try the play. We can learn a lot from the playtime and how far the user gets in the game. And we also want to try to balance, like if we think a level should take 5 minutes and it takes somebody 30 seconds, then there's probably something off about our balance. And then obviously the other way around is true as well. If we think it should take 5 minutes and it takes like 3 hours, then it's it's probably a lot harder, or we're not very clear in terms of what the expectations are. So playtime is another thing to test for. So we'll look at making a little survey that we can generate some charts in the lab this week. And so we'll see some fun graphics, like some pie charts and stuff about how long users played for. So this is kind of what I just said, but again, it's good to have a goal in terms of the gameplay length in mind. For our games, people aren't going to play them for 10 hours. They're probably going to play them for, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes. And so we want to have like a sense of what that expectation should be, so that we can, market the game correctly and, put as much work into the game as makes sense. Okay, so a few things that we can test for, some ways, things that we want to think about, some principles of testing. So one thing, we want to expect our users to have little or no familiarity with gaming. So that means somebody who's never played a game before should be able to play the game. And if they can't, you should be able to ask questions that tell us why. For us, we're going to be testing. Most of your testers are probably going to be other classmates. But I also encourage you guys to send your games to friends or family members to get outside perspectives from non-gamers. And that can tell you a lot about how somebody would approach the game if they don't really, already understand what they're supposed to be doing. One thing that we have to do is we don't want to make assumptions about the person who's playing the game. So sometimes you'll see when somebody's getting feedback that the game is too hard or it doesn't make sense. They might say, oh, that's because you don't know how to play games, or you're an idiot or something like that. We want to avoid that. Even if you think that somebody might be not a great gamer, you want to be able to understand their critique. We kind of have to assume that they're making a good faith critique, that they're saying this was too hard. Then we have to listen to what they're saying and try to understand what about it was too hard. So we don't want to dismiss people's criticism as just they don't know how to play games, or they're looking at it from a different way. So you have to kind of just accept that whatever somebody says, they mean it, and it's something that we can use to make the game better, rather than feeling bad or taking it personally or something like that. So we want to keep that in mind mostly when we're analyzing the feedback, but also think about it when we're asking questions. A couple different things that a couple different types of feedback that we want to get. So quantitative feedback. Quantitative feedback is things that have to do with numbers, so a rating or a scale. So you might say rate the difficulty on a scale of 1 to 5, and then you can compare all of the ratings from different users. So that's really useful to see if there's like trends among the users. So if every single person says it took me 30 seconds to beat this level, then you know that it's not just a random thing. It's like pretty consistent across your users. So quantitative feedback is a good way to just get general trends. How long did you play the game? Was it too hard? Other questions you might want to ask, like, did you think the sound was good? Did you think the graphics were good? You can get sort of like general ratings and compare those values across players. So when you have quantitative feedback, you usually have like a chart, something like this. So we have rate the difficulty. 3 people say it's too hard. 4 people say it's hard. 5 people say medium. 1 easy. 2 too easy. So that's actually, that would be a pretty good result, right? If you ask people to rate the difficulty and there's a good sort of like, wide variety of different responses, but there's, most people are in the middle, that would be a good result. Then we also have qualitative feedback. This is requires a little bit more interpretation. So qualitative feedback is verbal or written responses that go beyond just saying 1 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 or whatever. This is where we're going to give the users a chance to like explain their experience. So you might get things that you wouldn't have thought to test for. So if you have a question that's just like, give me your thoughts generally, your users will, just tell you what they think, and you may see things that you never thought of or never thought to ask. This is also a good way to just, get general feedback on specific elements of the game. So if you just ask every one of your users to say, what did you think of the color palette? Then you can see, you can read through their responses and kind of get a sense of if people liked it or thought it could be different or whatever. So we want to have both types of feedback so we can kind of compare and contrast. So when we make qualitative questions on our surveys, they're going to look like this, where we'll have just a question and then we'll have a spot for people to write out whatever they want. And we'll go over how to do that in the lab on the technical side, how to build a survey and add questions. It's pretty easy, but we'll have a video to go over that. Okay, so when we're creating the survey, start by choosing the elements of the game that are most important for the game to succeed. If your game is mostly a story, then you want to make sure that the story makes sense and that people like the story and wanted to see where it goes. If your game is an action game, you want to ask people if it was fun. If it's supposed to be really hard, you want to ask them if it's too difficult. So you want to think about what are the things that might make my game unique and are most important to me as a designer, and then ask questions that are going to lead people to give me feedback on those topics. So when we make the survey, you don't want to make it crazy long. Just 5 to 10 questions is fine. We just want to ask a few things so we can get some feedback on the game to figure out where to improve. When we're asking these questions, we don't want to lead the user. So instead of saying what was your favorite level, that kind of implies that you liked a level. We want to use more neutral language, like which level did you like the most. That will lead the user to kind of give a more general example or feedback. We also want to include specific questions as well as ambiguous questions, so we can target like really specific ideas, but also get a wide range of feedback. We want to try to figure out, once we know what we're looking for, we want to try to get the user to talk about those components. Okay, those are just a few basic things to keep in mind. We are going to do a lab on Thursday. We'll go over how to make a survey and collect responses, and then we'll make a blog post about that. It's not due next week, it's due in 2 weeks. Since we still have some time before the final. That gives you a little bit more time, because you are going to have to actually send the game to people and then wait to get feedback back from them. So that may take some time. So we have a little bit of extra time for that. We're also going to have to publish the games, because you need to send the game as well as the survey. So we'll use Itch for that, and that'll be part of the lab, is how to publish your game on Itch. So I think that's it. Any questions on any of these concepts?
Yeah, Professor.
Yeah.
If our game is good, can we make money off it?
Uh, when I had a student on one of their user testing surveys who said, how much would you pay for this game if it was on Steam? And I hadn't really thought of that question, but obviously they did. They were more interested in that aspect of it. And some people actually said that they would pay like, $3 or $5 or whatever. But most people I think said zero. I don't remember exactly. I should find that. If your game is good, you could. I don't know. Like there's a lot of games out there. Some people will pay money for them. It's definitely like a crowded marketplace. But it's not unheard of if you have good graphics and there's something interesting about it. And another thing, once you put your game on itch and see that ecosystem a little bit, itch is one place where you can publish games. There's a ton of them. But itch is really good for game jams, which is a good way that you can like create a game and get a lot of people to play it, because they'll also be playing games. Yeah, I don't know about making money, but you can find people to play it and see if people like it or not.
Yeah, because I remember some games, it's free, but they make money through advertisement and stuff. So, just wondering.
Yeah.
Because it gets
Yeah,
so
there's a lot
many
of different. Right, there's a lot of different models for games. Like on itch, usually it's like a donation thing where you can download the game for free, but if you want, you can give some money, or they'll be like you have to pay $2 or $3 or whatever. A lot of games also use ads. Those tend to be like web games or mobile games. It's a little bit easier to get somebody to download something that's free, and then if it has ads in it, you can make money off of that. There's probably, I mean, that's a whole other class, like marketing and sales for game stuff. Other questions about testing? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.